A Roman citizen lies trembling as his physician prepares a poultice of warm boar dung for a deep sword wound. This was the strange and desperate reality of ancient Roman medicine, a world where healing blended brutal science with outright superstition. We are about to uncover the most shocking medical remedies used by doctors in the empire. From gladiator blood to crocodile dung, you will discover the bizarre logic behind these treatments and learn which ones held a kernel of genuine science. What would you have done if your only hope for a cure involved swallowing a spider or wearing a worm around your neck? That warm boar dung poultice was not just a random act of desperation. It was the direct result of a complex medical worldview, a unique fusion of logic, faith, and fear. To truly understand these bizarre cures, you must first step inside the mind of a Roman doctor. His medical toolkit was a crowded one, filled with ideas borrowed from the Greeks, deeply ingrained superstitions, and his own sharp observations of the world. The most influential of these Greek imports was the theory of the four humors. Physicians believed the body was governed by four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a perfect balance of these humors, while sickness was an imbalance. This was a logical, almost scientific framework for its time. A fever and inflammation, for example, were seen as an excess of blood, which is why the standard treatment was bloodletting. But this logical system existed side by side with a profound belief in the supernatural. A Roman doctor would not see any contradiction in prescribing a diet to rebalance your humors, while also instructing you to wear an amulet to ward off the evil eye that caused your illness in the first place. Healing was a holistic endeavor, where a prayer to the goddess Febris for relief from a fever was just as valid as a cooling herbal bath. The gods were present in every aspect of life, and disease was often interpreted as a divine punishment or demonic invasion. So when a physician reached for a truly strange ingredient, like crushed millipedes or the ash of a cremated dog's head, he was operating on multiple levels. He was trying to balance your physical body, appease the angry gods, and repel the invisible forces of decay all at once. This was not madness, it was a complete, if sometimes terrifying, system of care. And within this chaotic blend of science and spirit, some of the most startling remedies were reserved for the most common of human ailments. One of the most startling prescriptions in all of Roman medicine was reserved for a condition they called the falling sickness. A person suffering from epilepsy was told their cure lay in the blood and liver of a slain gladiator. Imagine the scene in the dusty aftermath of the games, not with spectators cheering, but with desperate families and physicians waiting, cups in hand, to collect the warm, fresh blood of a warrior who had just died in the arena. This was not a fringe superstition. It was a widely accepted medical practice recorded by some of the most noted naturalists of the era. The logic, from a Roman perspective, was chillingly straightforward. A gladiator was the ultimate symbol of brute vitality and powerful life force. His strength, courage, and vigor were literally embodied in his blood. By drinking that blood, or consuming his liver, the seat of life, a patient was believed to absorb that potent energy, transferring the gladiator's unconquered spirit to their own failing body. It was a direct transfusion of power, meant to overwhelm the mysterious internal demons causing the seizures. This remedy reveals a profound cultural belief in the tangible transfer of qualities through consumption. The gladiator, though often a slave or criminal, became a sacrificial figure in a medical drama, his death offering a macabre hope for the living. Yet this desperate search for a cure did not end with the blood of arena fighters. Physicians also turned to the animal kingdom, seeking out other creatures whose very essence promised to restore what was lost. This desperate search for ingredients turned the very sand of the arena into a bizarre open-air pharmacy. In the moments after a gladiator's final breath, the spectacle was far from over. A different kind of crowd would surge forward, not for sport, but for survival. Physicians, their assistants, and ordinary citizens clutching cups and bowls would press in, competing for access to the fallen. The air, thick with dust and the metallic scent of blood, was now filled with the urgent murmurs of bargaining and the grim sound of collection. For the wealthy, A physician might pay a premium for the freshest, warm blood from a specific champion, believing its potency was greatest. For the poor, it was a grim free-for-all, a chance to scoop what remained from the ground. This macabre harvest was a stark reminder that the line between the arena's entertainment and the hospital's hope was terrifyingly thin. Such practices inevitably sparked fierce debate among the intellectual elite. Some Roman writers and philosophers expressed profound disgust, questioning the ethics of building cures on the foundation of a brutal, state-sanctioned death. They saw it as a descent into barbarism, a corruption of medicine itself. How could a civilized society believe that healing flowed from the veins of a slaughtered man? Yet for the desperate, such philosophical arguments held little weight against the raw, terrifying power of a seizure. The chance to steal a spark of life from death, no matter how grisly the method, was a chance worth taking. This conflict between hope and horror, between the healer's oath and the scavenger's need, was a quiet undercurrent in the roaring chaos of the games. And as physicians looked beyond the blood of gladiators, they found an even more surprising source of potential cures in the humblest of creatures. But the Roman quest for powerful cures did not end with the blood of the fallen. It extended even to the silent, dusty relics of the dead. For a common but persistent nosebleed, a physician might have prescribed a remedy that seems lifted from a ghost story. He would send you to acquire moss that had grown on a human skull, scrape it free, and then pack it directly into your bleeding nostrils. This is not a treatment born from a lack of alternatives, but from a deep and widespread belief in the potent, lingering energy contained within human remains. The Romans saw a skull not merely as a symbol of death, but as a vessel that had once held a vibrant life force. They believed that a residue of that power, a final echo of vitality, could be trapped within the bones long after the body had decayed. Moss, a living organism that fed upon this sacred vessel, was thought to absorb and concentrate this essence. By introducing this charged substance into a bleeding wound, the physician was attempting to do more than just apply a physical plug. He was trying to transfer that captured life force back into the patient, using the power of a past life to strengthen the faltering vessels of the present and command the blood to stop. The logic was a chilling form of sympathetic magic, where the stillness of the skull was meant to impose stillness upon the flow of blood. This practice reveals a culture that lived in intimate, daily contact with mortality, one that saw the boundary between the living and the dead as a porous membrane through which power could still flow. The belief that a cure could be harvested from the grave forced people to confront a deeply unsettling question. Where does one even find a human skull, let alone one with the right kind of moss growing on it? While the desperate sought cures in blood and bone, a far more humble and surprisingly effective remedy grew in nearly every Roman garden. Cabbage was not just a vegetable, it was a medical powerhouse, a universal cure all championed with near-fanatical zeal by influential figures like the statesman Cato the Elder. He did not merely suggest its use. He declared that cabbage could cure almost any ailment a person might suffer. A physician might prescribe its raw leaves to be wrapped around a festering wound, its bitter juice to be drunk for a sour stomach, or a poultice of its crushed seeds to be applied for the agonizing joint pain of gout. It was even considered a powerful preventative. Before a night of heavy drinking at a banquet, a Roman might chew on raw cabbage leaves, believing it would ward off the misery of the next morning's hangover. The methods of preparation were as varied as the ailments it was meant to treat. For external wounds, the leaves were often bruised, warmed, and bound directly to the skin, creating a soothing, moist bandage. For internal complaints, the plant was pounded and strained to produce a potent, vitamin-rich juice. Sometimes it was simply eaten raw or boiled into a medicinal broth. This was not blind superstition, though it certainly contained elements of folk magic. Modern science has revealed that cabbage is extraordinarily rich in vitamin C and antioxidants, compounds that fight inflammation and support the body's natural healing processes. The anti-inflammatory properties could indeed have provided genuine relief for gout and arthritis. The same vitamin C that helps wounds heal would have been a boon to a soldier recovering from a sword cut. The Roman faith in this common plant was, in its own way, a form of proto-science. a long-term observation that this particular food made people feel better and recover faster. So while the gladiator's blood promised a dramatic, supernatural cure, the steady, reliable cabbage was quietly doing the real work of healing all across the empire. This stark contrast between the macabre and the mundane reveals a medical world still trying to distinguish true cause from mere coincidence, a world where a garden vegetable could compete with the power of a human skull. Cato the Elder's belief in cabbage was not a casual preference, it was an absolute obsession. In his own writings, he declared that this single vegetable could effectively replace all other doctors and drugs. He provided detailed instructions, insisting that washing a baby in the urine of a child who had eaten cabbage would make them strong and healthy, and that applying a poultice of raw cabbage could draw together the edges of a wound as if by magic. For Cato, this was not just folk wisdom, it was a matter of Roman virtue, a way to rely on simple, homegrown strength instead of expensive foreign physicians. But was this fanatical faith in a garden plant completely misplaced? Modern science offers some surprising answers. Cabbage is packed with compounds called glucosinolates, which break down into powerful antibacterial and anti-inflammatory agents. The same substance that gives cabbage its sharp, sulfurous smell when cooked is also capable of fighting off certain strains of bacteria. The high concentration of vitamin C and antioxidants would have significantly reduced swelling and supported tissue repair in wounds. So when a Roman soldier wrapped his leg ulcer in a warm cabbage leaf, he was unknowingly applying a natural antiseptic bandage. The vegetable's juice, drunk for stomach complaints, could have soothed the lining of the gut and aided digestion. Cato was witnessing real results, even if he attributed them to the plant's inherent Roman power rather than its biochemistry. His crusade reveals a fascinating truth about ancient medicine, a world where relentless observation sometimes stumbled upon effective cures, even while wrapped in layers of superstition. Yet for all the genuine benefits of a simple cabbage, Roman doctors also placed their trust in ingredients that offered no such hidden virtues, turning to remedies far more unsettling and utterly devoid of any healing power. Perhaps the most jarring contrast to the humble cabbage was a remedy sourced from the distant, muddy banks of the Nile. Roman women seeking to prevent pregnancy might be instructed to use a pessary, a plug inserted into the body made from a paste of crocodile dung. The very idea of acquiring such an ingredient presented an almost insurmountable logistical challenge for an ordinary Roman citizen. This was not a plant you could grow in your kitchen garden, nor an animal commonly found in the markets of Rome. The dung had to be imported from Egypt, a long and expensive journey that turned this substance into an exotic, and likely costly, commodity. The symbolic logic behind its use, however, was brutally straightforward. The crocodile was one of the most feared and powerful creatures known to the Roman world. Its very excrement was seen as a substance of immense, aggressive potency, a physical manifestation of the animal's deadly nature. The belief was that this powerful essence could kill or drive away the seed of a man, acting as a primitive spermicide through a form of sympathetic magic. The sheer foreignness and danger associated with the crocodile were central to its perceived medical power. Physicians might mix the dung with other substances like honey or sour milk to form the paste, believing they were combining multiple potent agents to create an impenetrable barrier. Of course, from a modern perspective, introducing animal feces into the body is dangerously unhygienic and could easily cause severe infections, likely doing far more harm than any theoretical good. Yet this practice reveals a world where medicine was deeply intertwined with symbolism, where the perceived character of an animal could be transferred directly to its bodily waste. The crocodile's fearsome reputation was the entire foundation of the cure. This reliance on symbolic power extended even further, leading to treatment that involved creatures so small they could be worn as living jewelry. Even the most common battlefield injury could lead to a horrifying medical ritual. For a soldier with a deep, bleeding wound, a physician might reach for a poultice of warm, fresh boar dung, pressing it directly into the open flesh. The same treatment was recommended for the painful, swollen veins of hemorrhoids, a remedy of almost unimaginable discomfort. the logic from a Roman perspective was not one of madness, but of active purification. They believed that certain forms of filth possessed a powerful drawing quality, an ability to pull infection, poison, and disease out of the body. Just as a sponge soaks up water, the dung was thought to absorb the invisible agents of decay and pull them from the wound, leaving the body cleansed. This concept of fighting fire with fire, of using a potent dirt to draw out a malignant one, felt perfectly rational within their medical framework. They were not simply applying waste. They were deploying a substance teeming with what they perceived as aggressive, life-filled energy to overwhelm the forces of death at work in an injury. The choice of a boar was also significant, as it was a wild, aggressive animal, its essence considered fiercely potent. Yet this desperate attempt at purification came with a terrifyingly high price. Introducing fresh animal feces into a break in the skin was a direct invitation for disaster. The dung was a breeding ground for bacteria like Clostridium tetani, the very organism that causes tetanus, a disease characterized by agonizing muscle spasms and lockjaw, often leading to a painful death. It could also introduce other bacteria directly into the bloodstream, causing overwhelming sepsis, where the body's own defense systems turn against it, resulting in fever, shock, and organ failure. In their attempt to draw out one kind of death, Roman physicians were often unknowingly introducing another, far more certain one. The patient, praying for relief, would instead find their body becoming a battlefield for an invisible war they could never hope to win. This grim reality forces us to ask how a civilization so advanced in engineering and law could embrace a practice so fundamentally deadly. The answer lies not in a lack of intelligence, but in a complete misunderstanding of the unseen world, a void of knowledge where symbolism and stark necessity collided with tragic consequences. The most intimate ailments often called for the most unsettling cures. For a child suffering the violent spasms of whooping cough, or an adult plagued by a persistent toothache, a Roman physician might have prescribed a remedy that seems to defy all reason. He would instruct you to eat a mouse, not just a part of it, but the entire creature, often roasted whole. This is not an act of last resort starvation, but a calculated medical intervention for a range of common complaints. Warts could be treated by rubbing them with a mouse before it was consumed, a form of transference where the blemish was thought to pass from the person to the animal being eaten. The logic behind this practice was rooted in a deep-seated folk belief about the nature of the mouse itself. Mice were seen as creatures of immense, almost inexhaustible vitality. They were prolific breeders, able to squeeze into the smallest spaces and survive in the harshest conditions. To the Roman mind, consuming such a creature whole was to ingest that raw, untamed life force directly. It was an attempt to absorb the mouse's relentless energy and turn it against the weakness or decay manifesting as a cough or a toothache. The act of roasting the mouse was not merely for taste, it was a ritual of transformation, preparing this vessel of vitality for consumption. Could such a bizarre treatment have had any real effect? Modern science confirms that eating a roasted mouse offers no specific chemical cure for whooping cough or dental decay. Yet, the powerful theater of the cure, the dramatic act of consuming a whole animal, may have triggered a potent placebo effect. For a desperate parent watching their child struggle to breathe, the belief that they were administering a powerful, life-giving substance could have provided a profound sense of control and hope. The child, witnessing the gravity of the ritual, might have experienced a real, if temporary, alleviation of symptoms, their own body responding to the powerful suggestion of a cure. This strange practice stands as a perfect symbol of Roman medicine's enduring conflict, a world where the relentless search for healing power could find potential in anything, from the might of a gladiator to the humble, scurrying life of a mouse. The line between a doctor's prescription and a sorcerer's charm was often invisible in ancient Rome. For common ailments and invisible threats, a physician might not hand you a potion, but a small pouch to wear around your neck, one filled with the dried eyes of a lizard or the fine ashes of a cremated weasel. These were not mere decorations, they were medical devices, amulets believed to act as a first line of defense against sickness and malevolent spirits. The logic was one of transference and symbolic warfare. A lizard, with its astonishing ability to regrow a lost tail, was seen as a master of regeneration. Its eyes, therefore, were thought to hold a concentrated power over decay and loss. By carrying them, you were harnessing that regenerative energy to keep your own body whole, to repel the forces that might cause a fever or a wasting disease. The weasel, however, was chosen for a very different and rather dark reputation. Roman naturalists wrote that weasels were thought to conceive through their ear and give birth through their mouth. This bizarre and completely incorrect biological belief cast the weasel as a creature that defied the natural order. Its entire life cycle was a form of powerful magic. Ashes from its cremated body were thus believed to be saturated with this chaotic, anti-natural energy, making them the perfect weapon to confuse and drive away the evil spirits thought to cause sudden illnesses. A mother might sew a tiny bag of weasel ash into her child's tunic to protect them from a plague sweeping through the city, while a soldier might carry a lizard's eye into battle, hoping its power would help his wounds close faster than any physician's poultice. This practice reveals a world where every object, every animal, held a potential charge of symbolic power that could be tapped for healing. The amulet was a portable shield, a piece of the natural world's hidden arsenal, worn on the body to wage a constant, silent war against the unseen. A Roman struggling to breathe might find their physician prescribing a remedy of startling specificity. For the wheezing and tightness of asthma, the treatment was not an herbal steam, but the thick, acrid smoke produced by burning the lungs of a fox. Picture the scene in a healer's courtyard, where a patient leans over a small brazier, inhaling deeply as the delicate organs of a wild animal crackle and blacken. The logic behind this practice was a classic example of sympathetic magic, a principle woven deeply into the fabric of ancient Roman thought. The fox was renowned for its stamina and cunning, an animal that could run for miles without seeming to tire. Its exceptional respiratory capacity was its most visible power, the very engine of its survival. By burning its lungs and inhaling the resulting smoke, the patient was performing a direct act of transference. The essence of the fox's powerful breath, its boundless wind, was believed to be carried on those fumes, entering the patient's own constricted airways to force them open and restore easy breathing. It was an attempt to steal the very breath of a creature famed for its vigor. This remedy, like so many others, reveals a medical philosophy that saw the natural world as a vast reservoir of symbolic power, where every animal's strength could be harvested to meet a corresponding human weakness. The strong-lunged fox was a living medicine cabinet for the breathless, its body consumed in a desperate, smoky ritual to gift its vitality to the sick. Even the most mundane daily rituals could involve ingredients we would find shocking today. A Roman seeking a bright, white smile might not reach for a minty paste, but for a bottle of aged human urine, specifically imported from the Iberian Peninsula. This was not a fringe practice, but a common and lucrative industry. The ammonia present in urine, a powerful cleaning agent we still use today, gave this remedy a kernel of scientific credibility. The Romans observed that this substance could cut through grime and stains, and they logically applied that same cleansing power to the human body. People would use it as a mouthwash, swishing it around to whiten their teeth, and they believed to strengthen their gums. They also applied it directly to sores, cuts, and insect stings, convinced it would purify the wound and prevent infection. The most prized urine came from Portugal and Spain, where it was collected from public latrines, aged in vast vats to increase its potency, and then shipped across the empire. The ammonia concentration would increase as the urine decomposed, making it an even more effective, albeit foul-smelling, bleach and disinfectant. This created a booming trade, with a special tax imposed on the collections by the Emperor Vespasian. When his son Titus complained about the unsavory nature of this revenue, Vespasian reportedly held a gold coin up to his nose and remarked that money does not smell. This practice forces us to confront a strange duality in Roman medicine. They had stumbled upon a genuinely effective chemical, ammonia, but were applying it in ways that ignored the profound risks of introducing waste products into open wounds or the mouth. It was a world where an observable truth about cleaning power was wildly extrapolated into a medical cure-all, proving that even their most logical discoveries were filtered through a world where the boundaries between pharmacy and filth were constantly and dangerously blurred. The streets of Rome itself became a primary source for this unusual commodity. On nearly every corner, large clay pots stood waiting not for trash, but for the passing contributions of the city's residents. These public vessels were a common sight, a utilitarian fixture of urban life maintained by the state or by private entrepreneurs. For the average citizen, it was simply a convenient necessity, but for the collectors, it was the first step in a highly organized and profitable supply chain. Each morning, these pots were emptied by workers who transported the liquid cargo to large-scale processing facilities outside the city center. Here, the urine was poured into vast vats and left to ferment for weeks or even months. This aging process was crucial, as it allowed the urea to break down into ammonia, dramatically increasing its potency as a bleaching and cleansing agent. This was not a small-time operation, it was an industry with dedicated warehouses and a workforce skilled in managing the volatile, pungent stores. The finished product was then distributed to two major clients, the fullers who operated the city's laundries and the physicians who stocked their clinics. The fullers used it to clean the woolen togas of the Roman elite, stomping the garments in vats of stale urine to lift out grease and grime. The doctors, in turn, prescribed it for its perceived antiseptic and whitening properties. Recognizing the immense value of this trade, Emperor Vespasian made a controversial but brilliant fiscal move. He placed a special tax, the vectigal urinae, directly on the collection and sale of urine. This decision was met with public ridicule and private disgust, particularly from his own son, Titus, who found the very source of the revenue to be beneath the dignity of the empire. The story goes that Vespasian responded by holding a gold coin from the first urine tax payment to his son's nose and asking if the money smelled. When Titus admitted it did not, the emperor reportedly declared that money has no odor. This famous anecdote captures the brutal pragmatism of Roman commerce. A substance considered waste was systematically harvested, processed, and monetized, its value extracted not just for cleaning and healing, but for filling the state's coffers. The entire system, from the street corner pot to the emperor's new tax, reveals a society that saw utility in everything, even the most basic human byproduct. It forces us to wonder what other surprising industries, hidden in plain sight, powered the daily life of the ancient world. Yet for the agonizing, relentless throb of a toothache, a Roman healer might have offered a remedy that required no potions or poultices at all. He would have told you to capture a specific type of worm, place it alive into a tiny linen bag, and tie it securely around your neck. This is not a recipe for a meal, but a medical prescription, a living amulet designed to draw the pain straight out of your jaw. The logic was a perfect example of sympathetic magic, where the characteristics of an object or creature were believed to influence the ailment. Worms were seen as creatures of constant, writhing movement, the very embodiment of the squirming, twisting agony felt in an abscessed tooth. By containing this creature and hanging it directly against the skin, the physician believed he was creating a powerful diversion. The pain, a restless entity in its own right, would be attracted to the even more restless worm trapped in the bag. It would leap from the patient's tooth into the living creature, leaving the person in peace while the worm absorbed and contained the suffering. The treatment was a form of spiritual transference, where the worm became a living sacrifice, a scapegoat for human pain. One can almost hear the whispered instructions, the careful selection of the worm, and the desperate hope in the patient's eyes as the simple bag was tied into place. This bizarre charm forces us to confront the raw desperation of life before modern dentistry. A toothache could be a death sentence, leading to a systemic infection that no poultice of dung or drink of urine could cure. In that context, wearing a worm was a harmless, if utterly futile, act of hope. It was a small, desperate spell against an invisible enemy, a quiet ritual that gave the sufferer a sense of control when every other option had failed. One remedy, however, stood apart in its strange and undeniable power. For the blinding pain of a chronic headache or the agonizing struggle of a difficult childbirth, a Roman physician might send for a live electric ray fish. This is not a poultice or a potion, but a living, breathing creature hauled from the Mediterranean and kept alive in a tank of seawater until the moment of treatment. The procedure was as direct as it was startling. The wet, slimy body of the ray would be pressed firmly against the patient's bare skin, often on the forehead for a headache or the lower abdomen during labor. Upon contact, the fish would deliver its natural defensive jolt, a pulse of electricity that would course through the patient's body. This was one of the rare instances where Roman medicine stumbled upon a principle that modern science would later confirm: neurostimulation. The electric shock, while painful in itself, could overwhelm the local nerve pathways, effectively scrambling the signals for the original, deeper pain. For a woman in prolonged labor, the intense muscular contraction triggered by the shock might also help to stimulate the uterus, potentially restarting a stalled birthing process. Imagine the scene: a dimly lit room where the hope for relief literally pulsed with a life of its own, a captured force of nature applied directly to human suffering. The Roman doctor had no concept of electricity. He likely believed he was harnessing the ray's innate magical power or its potent life force. Yet, by observing that this specific creature could numb pain and cause muscles to contract, he was accidentally unlocking a form of therapy that was centuries ahead of its time. This bizarre practice forces a profound question. In a world saturated with symbolic cures and magical thinking, how did they even discover that a specific fish could deliver such a unique sensation? The answer lies not in laboratory science, but in the daily dangers of the fishing trade. Perhaps the most desperate of all Roman remedies was reserved for a disease they knew to be a death sentence: rabies. If a person was bitten by a rabid dog, a physician might have prescribed a treatment of almost unimaginable cruelty. He would instruct you to find a specific puppy, one still young enough to be unweaned, and then to kill it, dismember its body, and burn the pieces completely to ash. These ashes were then mixed into a paste and packed directly into the bite wound. The sheer horror of this act is difficult to overstate, yet it was born from a profound and terrifying logic. The Romans saw rabies as a poison, a form of madness transferred directly from the saliva of the afflicted dog into the victim's bloodstream. They believed this poison had a kind of consciousness, a malicious intent to spread. The logic of sympathetic magic demanded a cure that mimicked the disease. By destroying a young, healthy dog, they were creating a powerful, symbolic antidote. The life force of the puppy, concentrated in its ashes, was thought to act as a countercharm, a pure canine essence that could overwhelm and neutralize the rabid poison at the very site of its entry. It was a brutal, sacrificial exchange, a life for a life, meant to confuse and repel the advancing madness. This remedy existed in a space beyond simple superstition, in the raw territory of absolute desperation. Everyone knew that rabies was 100% fatal. Once the symptoms of foaming mouth, terror of water, and violent aggression appeared, death was certain and agonizing. In the face of such a horrifying fate, any possible cure, no matter how monstrous, would be tried. The killing of the puppy was not an act of casual cruelty, but a grim, ritualized sacrifice performed in the shadow of a guaranteed and gruesome death. It forces us to ask what we would be willing to do, what lines we would cross, if faced with a disease that modern medicine had no answer for. This stark confrontation with mortality reveals the darkest edge of Roman healing, where hope itself became a brutal and heartbreaking act. The search for love and desire could lead a Roman straight to the carcass of a hyena. Physicians and love magicians sought out specific parts of this feared scavenger, believing its eyes and anus held a concentrated power over human passion. The hyena was an animal of deep contradictions in the Roman mind, a creature that was said to change its sex from male to female and back again, that fed on the dead, and that could mimic the human voice to lure dogs to their doom. This strange and fluid nature made it the perfect ingredient for love potions, which were themselves tools of manipulation and control. The logic was brutally symbolic. A potion might include the animal's dried, powdered eyes, believed to grant the user a hypnotic power over their beloved, forcing them to return their gaze with uncontrollable desire. More shocking still was the use of the hyena's anus, a part of the body associated with base instinct and raw animality. This was ground into powders or infused into wines, intended to transmit the hyena's perceived rampant lust directly to the drinker, overwhelming their reason with primal urges. These were not gentle charms for fostering affection, but aggressive magical assaults designed to bend another person's will. The creation of such a potion was a dark alchemy, blending the physical with the symbolic in a desperate attempt to command the most unpredictable of human emotions. It reveals a world where the boundaries between pharmacy, magic, and coercion were non-existent, and where the pursuit of love could justify harnessing the most maligned forces of the natural world. Even a common fever could lead to a remedy of profound personal dread. A physician might hand you a single plump raisin with a startling instruction to swallow it whole without chewing. Hidden inside that sweet, dried fruit was a live spider, its legs perhaps still twitching within its sticky tomb. The goal was not to add protein to your diet, but to trap the fever itself. This cure operated on a principle of entrapment and sacrifice. The raisin served as a delicious prison, a lure to help the patient overcome their natural revulsion and get the spider down. Once inside the body, the spider was believed to become a living decoy. Fevers were often seen as malevolent entities, invisible demons or poisons burning within the blood. The spider, a creature associated with webs and capture, was thought to weave a magical net inside the patient, ensnaring the fever's essence. As the spider itself died and was digested, it was believed to carry the captured illness down into the stomach for destruction, a tiny, self-sacrificing scorpion for your internal fire. One can only imagine the sheer willpower required to comply, the feeling of that small, living package moving down the throat, a moment of psychological torment traded for the hope of physical relief. In a world without thermometers or an understanding of infection, a fever was a terrifying and mysterious invader. Any action that promised to draw it out, no matter how bizarre or unsettling, offered a sliver of control over the invisible forces raging within the body. This strange ritual makes us wonder how many other cures were endured not for their physical effect, but for the powerful, desperate hope they provided in a moment of sheer vulnerability. The vanity of a receding hairline could lead a Roman man to a truly startling pharmacy. To combat the slow march of baldness, a physician might have prescribed a paste made from the fine ashes of a cremated donkey's head, carefully mixed with wine until it formed a thick, gray slurry. This concoction was then rubbed vigorously into the scalp, its gritty texture massaged deep into the skin where hair once grew. The choice of a donkey was not random, but deeply symbolic. The donkey was an animal famed for its stubborn vitality, its coarse, thick mane, and its relentless endurance. The logic of sympathetic magic demanded that these powerful qualities, concentrated in the animal's head, could be transferred directly to the human scalp through the medium of its ashes. By burning the head, the very seat of the creature's identity, and blending its essence with wine, a substance of life and celebration, the physician believed he was creating a potent elixir of regrowth. He was attempting to command the patient's own hair follicles to emulate the donkey's stubborn refusal to yield, to cling to the scalp with the same tenacity. This remedy stands as a perfect, poignant testament to the endless and often heartbreaking human search for a cure for hair loss. For centuries, men have been desperate to reverse this visible sign of aging, a vulnerability that even the most powerful emperor could not always command away. The application of donkey ash was a physical act of hope, a gritty prayer rubbed into the skin, yet for all its elaborate symbolism, the treatment was utterly futile. It offered no chemical stimulation to dormant follicles, no genuine nourishment to the scalp. Its only power was the fleeting psychological comfort of taking action, of believing that the stubborn strength of a beast of burden could, by some strange magic, become your own. These bizarre remedies were not performed with bare hands alone. The Roman physician possessed a toolkit that would look strikingly familiar in some ways and utterly alien in others, a collection of bronze and iron instruments recovered from the ashes of Pompeii and other sites. His scalpel, for instance, was a masterwork of metalcraft, a slender blade with a carefully weighted handle, designed for the precise incision of an abscess or the delicate opening of a vein. Alongside it lay the bone drill, a fearsome tool with a braided handle to allow for a steady, rotating pressure. Its sharp bit meant to bore into the skull to relieve pressure or into a damaged tooth to drain infection. He had forceps of various shapes, some with fine, smooth tips for plucking fragments of bone from a wound, others with sharp, crocodile-like teeth for gripping slippery blood vessels to seal them shut. The very existence of these tools reveals a stunning duality in Roman medicine. The same healer who prescribed a paste of crocodile dung might also skillfully set a broken bone with a specialized brace, or perform a cataract operation with a needle so fine it barely disturbed the eye. This was a world where advanced mechanical understanding coexisted with a complete ignorance of germ theory. A beautiful bronze scalpel, honed to a perfect edge, would be used in succession on multiple patients without any sterilization, its gleaming surface carrying invisible armies from one body to the next. The instruments themselves were a testament to Roman engineering, but their use was guided by a map of the body that was half observation and half myth. A surgeon might use that sophisticated drill to perform trepanation, carefully removing a circle of bone from a patient's skull not to address a physical bleed, but to release the evil spirits they believed were causing a migraine or epileptic fit. The tools were capable of remarkable precision, yet they were wielded by hands still groping in the dark, guided by a philosophy where the symbolic and the surgical were forever intertwined. The person holding that bronze scalpel or mixing that paste of crocodile dung was as diverse as the empire itself. A Roman doctor could be anyone from a shackled Greek slave ordered to tend to his master's family to a celebrated, wealthy intellectual whose opinions were sought by emperors. At the lowest rung were the medics attached to the legions, often Greeks or other conquered peoples with practical experience. They learned their trade not in schools, but on the blood-soaked ground of battlefields, stitching wounds and setting bones under the immense pressure of screaming men and charging horses. Their social standing was barely above the soldiers they treated, yet their skills were the thin line between a legion's strength and its collapse. Then there were the private practitioners, setting up small shops in the bustling Roman streets. Many of these were also freedmen or immigrants, particularly from Greece, where medical knowledge was more advanced. They competed for patients in a crowded, unregulated marketplace, their reputations built on a combination of perceived success, persuasive charm, and sheer luck. A failure could mean more than a lost customer. It could mean a riot at your door or a lawsuit from a grieving family. A patient who died under your care could lead to exile or even a death sentence, a constant professional hazard that hung over every diagnosis. But at the very top stood figures like Galen, the rock star physician of the ancient world. Born in Greece to a wealthy family, his genius and ambition brought him to Rome, where he became the personal doctor to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Galen dissected animals to understand anatomy, wrote hundreds of medical texts, and his theories would dominate medicine for the next 1,500 years. He was a medical celebrity, his wealth and status a world away from the army medic in the mud. This vast spectrum from slave to scholar meant that the quality of care a Roman received was a terrifying lottery. Your life could rest in the hands of a battle-hardened genius or a complete charlatan peddling donkey ash hair tonic with equal confidence. How did a society so obsessed with order and law allow such chaos in its healing art? The answer lies in a world where the authority to heal came not from a license, but from the compelling and often terrifying power of results. Even the most desperate remedies had their limits. When the last spider was swallowed, the final poultice applied, and the patient drew their final, ragged breath, the world of Roman medicine gave way to the solemn rituals of the funeral. For a family, this was not an admission of defeat, but a necessary, sacred process to guide their loved one safely into the afterlife. The moment of death was marked with profound ceremony. The closest relative would lean over the body to catch the last breath with a kiss, a tender act that also symbolically transferred the person's spirit, or anima, out of the mortal world. Then, the professional mourners would begin their work. These were women hired for the occasion, their hair loosened and their clothes torn, who would fill the house with loud, rhythmic wailing and chants of praise for the deceased. This was not merely an expression of grief, it was a vital social performance, a public declaration of the family's loss and the importance of the one who had passed. The body was carefully washed, anointed with oils and perfumes to mask the scent of decay, and dressed in their finest toga. A small coin was placed in the mouth, a final, crucial payment. This was the obol for Charon, the grim ferryman who rowed souls across the river Styx into the underworld. Without this coin, a soul was doomed to wander the banks for 100 years, a restless, forgotten ghost. This single, simple act reveals how deeply the Romans feared an improper transition, believing that the peace of the dead was as important as the health of the living. The funeral procession itself was a public spectacle, a final journey through the streets led by musicians and the professional mourners, their cries ensuring the entire community witnessed the passage. For the wealthy and powerful, actors would wear masks carved to resemble the faces of their famous ancestors, literally walking the family's history through the city one last time. The body was then carried outside the city walls to its final rest, for Roman law strictly forbade burial within the sacred boundary of the city, the pomerium. This separation of the living from the dead was a matter of both hygiene and spiritual purity. The final choice of what happened to the body, however, divided the rich from the poor and revealed two very different visions of eternity. The most prestigious and expensive option was cremation. The body was placed upon a towering pyre, often laden with precious spices, and the patient's own medical tools or leftover remedies, a final offering. Once the flames had cooled, the family would carefully collect the bones and ashes, washing them in wine or milk before placing them in a beautifully carved stone box, an urn. This urn was then sealed inside a collective family tomb, a mausoleum lining the roads leading out of Rome, where offerings of food and wine could be regularly made. Inhumation, or burial of the entire body, was an older practice that regained popularity later in the empire, partly influenced by mystery religions that promised bodily resurrection. A body would be laid in a stone sarcophagus or a simple wooden coffin, often buried with grave goods for the journey ahead, a lamp to light the darkness, a loaf of bread for sustenance, and that ever-present coin for the ferryman. But for the destitute, the slaves, and those without family, there was no such dignity. Their bodies were often tossed into mass burial pits called puticuli, or left to the elements in open graveyards beyond the city's care. This stark divide in death mirrored the inequalities of life, a final reminder that even in the face of the great equalizer, Roman society maintained its brutal hierarchy. These elaborate rites were not just about disposal, they were a bridge. They were the family's last, loving act of care, a meticulously choreographed sequence designed to do what no physician ever could, to ensure the spirit found its way home. That legacy of Roman medicine, a chaotic blend of the effective and the lethal, did not die with the empire. It flowed like a contaminated river into the Middle Ages, its waters carrying both poison and a few precious drops of genuine healing. For centuries to come, physicians would still be prescribing potions of crushed insects and amulets of weasel bone, their practice guided by the same texts that once recommended gladiator blood. The enduring power of Galen's writings, in particular, fossilized Roman errors for over a millennium, turning his brilliant but flawed observations into unshakable dogma. Yet within that stubborn tradition, a few of their accidental discoveries survived as well. The humble cabbage poultice, rich in vitamin C, found its way into monastic infirmaries. The use of wine to clean wounds, another Roman practice with some antiseptic merit, was passed down through generations of battlefield surgeons. This was the dual inheritance of Rome, a medical toolkit where a handful of useful seeds were buried in a mountain of symbolic, and often deadly, superstition. So how do we separate their rare successes from the overwhelming failures? The key lies not in the ingredients they used, but in the process they lacked. Roman medicine was a discipline of observation without experimentation, of seeing that something worked but rarely testing why. They saw a wound heal after being packed with honey and correctly assumed honey had healing properties. They saw a patient recover after electric ray was applied and attributed it to the creature's magical life force, not the biological phenomenon of nerve disruption. They were brilliant pattern recognizers trapped in a world with no concept of the controlled experiment, the clinical trial, or the germ. This fundamental gap meant that every genuine cure, like the anti-inflammatory power of cabbage, was hopelessly entangled with 1,000 useless or harmful ones, like the fever-trapping spider or the infection-spreading boar dung. Their legacy teaches us less about biology and more about the incredible resilience of the human spirit in the face of profound uncertainty. It is a story of people refusing to surrender to suffering, of using every tool at their disposal, from logic to prayer to pure desperation, to fight for one more day of life. They reached for the mouse, the worm, and the donkey's head not out of stupidity, but out of a fierce, unyielding will to live. In their bizarre and often heartbreaking remedies, we see our own deepest fears reflected, and we witness the raw, enduring courage it takes to seek a cure when you are completely in the dark. From the gladiator's blood to the donkey's ashes, Roman medicine was a landscape of profound desperation and startling creativity. We have walked through a world where a physician's prescription could be as logical as a cabbage poultice, or as horrifying as a paste of puppy ashes for rabies. These were not random acts of cruelty or ignorance, but the result of a medical philosophy that blended sharp observation with deep-seated superstition. They saw that honey helped wounds heal and that electric rays could numb pain, but they explained these effects through a lens of symbolic magic and vital forces. Every spider swallowed, every worm worn, was a testament to the human will to survive in a world where the true causes of disease were completely unknown. This bizarre fusion of proto-science and pure faith defined an era of healing that was as brutal as it was, at times, accidentally effective. So, after this journey into the heart of ancient Roman remedies, we have to ask you, which of these cures did you find the most shocking? Was it the gladiator's blood drunk for epilepsy, the crocodile dung used as contraception, or the simple, terrifying act of swallowing a live spider to trap a fever? Share your thoughts in the comments below.